This is the Mother Cabrini Shrine along Interstate 70 outside Golden, Colorado. When I was a college student, before I was even a Christian, much less a Catholic, I would just drive past it on my way to go skiing or hiking up in the mountains. I had no idea who she was, and I paid no attention to it, just shrugged as I passed it by at 70 miles an hour. Well, I'm back, too many years later, to finally discover who Mother Cabrini was. I can't wait to share her story with you. And then, the story behind her story. Let's go inside and see what we can learn. I'm Greg Smith, and over the next year I'll be your guide around the world and back and forth through the ages as we discover the Catholic story and how the Church has preserved the faith once and for all given to the saints. One of the first things we discover is that Mother Cabrini was actually St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, an Italian immigrant who became a U.S. citizen, and the first U.S. citizen to ever be canonized as a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. Frances Cabrini was a nun who founded a new religious order, the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and as the superior of her order, the sisters called her Mother, of course. But so did all the children she provided for. And that was a lot of children. In her career, Mother founded 67 different institutions, orphanages, schools, camps, etc. In New York, in Chicago, in Seattle, New Orleans, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, throughout Latin America and Europe. And in Denver, Colorado, just down that hill. In 1904, Mother Cabrini established the Queen of Heaven Orphanage in Denver, Colorado. It served orphan girls, especially the daughters of Italian immigrants who worked the mines in these foothills. But she wanted to give the girls opportunities to get out of the city, to enjoy a healthier life outdoors and develop community and charity and character. So, in 1910, she bought this property on the side of Lookout Mountain over the town of Golden. And here on Lookout Mountain, she built a summer camp and a small farm for the girls at the orphanage. The girls would come up here in the summers, living in a dormitory, working and worshiping together. They became strong and resilient and productive, and they lived in Catholic community with each other. The campus of the Mother Cabrini Shrine has a number of interesting things to see and experience. In the visitor center is a chapel. With a life-size icon of Mother. While I was at the visitor center, I bought a small icon of Mother Cabrini. It's right up here on my shelf, next to Our Lady of Guadalupe and my Celtic cross from Skellig Michael. But the more I studied Mother in preparation for this episode, the more I've taken to calling it my Mother Cabrini action figure. And I'm only half joking. And I think that after this episode, you'll see why she was an action figure. Next to the chapel, I found this room used for overflow seating that had the most remarkable stained glass windows. The windows, in sequence from left to right, tell her story. And so, in this episode, we'll follow her story as the windows tell it. Maria Francesca Cabrini was born in 1850, not far from the city of Milan, in the small country town of San Angelo Lodigiano. Her parents were farmers, and she was the youngest of their 13 children. But those were hard times, and only 4 of the 13 survived to adulthood. Francesca was born 2 months early, and her family and neighbors recalled an unusual occurrence the day she was born. A flock of doves began circling the family home as her mother was in labor. Her father was so surprised that he caught one and brought it inside to his wife and the new baby. It was remarkable, but no one knew at the time what it portended. Born prematurely, she was small and weak as a child, with fragile health for the rest of her life. But she was a bright girl, with a keen intellect and a great imagination. The Cabrinis were a devout family, and Francesca followed the custom of the day. She was confirmed at 7 and had her first communion 2 years later, when she was 9. Her first communion was a life-changing event for her. A passion for the presence of Christ in her life, and for sharing it with others, formed and foretold who she would become. She remained deeply devoted to the Eucharist for the rest of her life. But as she grew up in that small town in the Italian countryside, there was nothing that would seem to suggest that she would someday leave Italy, much less travel the world. Until one day when she was 13, when her vocation, her destiny, was foreshadowed on a riverbank. A missionary had visited her town and shared his experiences of traveling to the Catholic missions in China, reaching out with Christ's love, winning souls for the kingdom of God at what seemed to her like the ends of the earth. Not long after hearing him speak, she was visiting her uncle, a priest who lived by a river. Now, one afternoon, her uncle found her beside the river, placing flowers in little paper boats that she had folded. She dropped them in the river, where the current carried them away downstream. What was she doing, her uncle the priest asked. "These are my missionaries," Francesca said, "and I'm sending them to China." Something else happened at the riverbank that would foreshadow her destiny. One day, she fell into the river. She couldn't swim and nearly drowned, but she was miraculously rescued by what she believed was an angel. From then on, Francesca was afraid of water and never did learn to swim. Yet she was convinced that she would be protected by the Lord and her guardian angel whenever she traveled across it. She began attending a school run by an order of nuns called the Daughters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. 5 years later, at 18, she graduated cum laude with a teaching certificate. Francesca was a very bright young woman. 2 years later, when she was 20, her parents died, and she applied to enter the Daughters of the Sacred Heart, to take holy orders and join the nuns who had been her teachers. Now, to really understand Mother Cabrini's story, we need to understand the devotion of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Devotion to the most Sacred Heart of Jesus has its roots in the Middle Ages, when Catholic mystics and ascetics began to focus prayer and adoration on the wounds of Christ. Christ's wounds are evidence and expression of his sacrificial love for us. And the wound to his heart, from the centurion's spear that pierced his side, was the perfect symbol of how his loving heart was given and broken for fallen humanity. To reflect upon the heart of Christ, pierced for us, is to be drawn deeply into contemplation of that love. In 1673, a French nun received a series of visions in which Jesus asked for devotion to his Sacred Heart to be expressed with reception of Holy Communion on the first Friday of each month, Eucharistic adoration during a holy hour on Thursdays, and the celebration of the Feast of the Sacred Heart. This devotional practice grew more popular. In 1899, Pope Leo XIII, who we will see played a prominent role in Mother Cabrini's life, consecrated the entire world to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. A whole genre of Catholic devotional art was created to express and focus this devotion. And so, to understand Mother Cabrini, we must know that she was
passionately committed to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, a devotion to Christ's absolute, self-giving love for the world. And so, when she was 20, she asked to join the order of nuns who had been her teachers for 5 years, the Daughters of the Sacred Heart. But they turned her down. She was too frail, they said. They said she didn't have a strong enough physical constitution for the religious life. And so she took a job as the headmistress and teacher at a nearby orphanage and school. She and a few other women shared a home and informally began to live a religious life without having formally taken vows. She became the leader of this little community of not quite nuns. When she was 30 years old, her local bishop said to her, "Francesca, you've always wanted to be a missionary. I know of no religious order of missionary women. Why don't you found the first one?" And so she did. In 1880, she and 7 other women founded the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and were consecrated by the bishop. Remember, the order she had wanted to join when she was a teenager was the Daughters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Francesca's devotion to the Sacred Heart had not changed, but she wanted to take the love of Christ to the ends of the earth. So she called her new order the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart. You see, her vision was that she and her sisters would take the Sacred Heart of Jesus to China, just like the paper boats she had set into the stream when she was 13 years old. So much so that when she took her vows, she took the name Xavier as her religious name, after St. Francis Xavier, co-founder of the Jesuit order, who had pioneered missions to China and Japan. That's why she's formally known as Francis Xavier Cabrini, or sometimes it's abbreviated Francis X Cabrini. And when she took her vows, she chose as her motto St. Paul's words in Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Now she and her new sisters took in orphans and abandoned children. They started a day school, earning tuition to help pay their expenses, and they did needlework, selling their embroidery to earn a little extra money. In their first 5 years, Mother established 7 homes for children, as well as a nursery and free school in their local diocese south of Milan. But always, their goal was to raise enough money to take their ministry to China. Eventually, word of their good works spread through the hierarchy, and even to Pope Leo XIII. One of the great popes of the 19th century, Leo XIII guided the Church through times of tumultuous change. Among other things, he's the pope who wrote the St. Michael prayer. And in 1887, Mother Cabrini made her first visit to Rome. As the head of this small religious order, the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart, she got to take part in an audience with the Holy Father. And when the Pope commended her and her sisters on their good works, she explained her passion for taking the Sacred Heart of Jesus to China. At the end of the 19th century, China was becoming open to Christian missionaries in ways it had never been before. For the first time, missionaries were moving beyond the coastal cities to the interior. Protestant missionaries were making inroads to reach people who had never heard the gospel before. And Mother Cabrini wanted to take her sisters and join them, just as she had since she first heard the visiting missionary when she was 13 years old and set her paper boats into the river, sending them off like missionaries to China. Pope Leo XIII listened to her describe her vision. He was impressed with her vocation, her passion, but he thought that this amazing woman was aimed at the wrong target. And then Pope Leo XIII told her something that would change the direction of Cabrini's life and the lives of millions of others. In the late 1800s, Italy was going through great turmoil. In its entire history, Italy had never been a nation. It was a peninsula, a place like South America is a place. It was made up of small kingdoms, little city-states, and territories ruled from places like Austria and France. It had been ruled by the Roman Empire, but that had fallen 13 centuries earlier. But right around the time Francesca Cabrini was born, Italy began going through a series of civil wars, which resulted in the formation of the nation-state of Italy. And the new nation was experiencing the growth of and conflict between industrial capitalism on the one hand and communism on the other. In fact, Leo XIII is famous for guiding the church through those challenges. And all of this turmoil was displacing great numbers of ordinary people. Their old ways of life were coming to an end, and so they went in search of opportunities for a new, better life. And millions of them headed for America. The wave of Italian immigration in the late 19th century, like the Irish around the same time, is known as the Italian diaspora. People whose families had been rooted in a culture for centuries were landing in a new country with a new language, new technologies, new ways of life. Many would succeed, but many were lost, disoriented, unmoored, and losing their Catholic faith. And so, the Holy Father looked at Sister Francesca Xavier Cabrini, the leader of the aspiring Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart, and told her, "Not to the east, Mother, but to the west. Go to America. There you will find a great field of labor." And so, a legendary pope redirected a great saint and wrote a chapter in the one-whirling adventure that is the Catholic story. Mother Cabrini was set on a new path that she never imagined, but she took to heart the words of Jesus, to have courage, for I will be with you to the very ends of the earth, as she committed to take the Sacred Heart of Jesus, like her little paper boats, to the New World. In 1889, Mother and 6 of her sisters left for America, sailing on a ship with 1,500 other immigrants bound for New York City. For someone that was afraid of the water, it took the courage that she got from Jesus to board that ship. But from the time she had fallen into the river at 13, she knew that she would be protected. That voyage would be the first of 25 transatlantic crossings she would make in her life. Think about that. Most of us won't fly to Europe 25 times on an airplane in our lifetime. Mother and the sisters traveled in second class. They wrote in their journals about the rough seas and constant seasickness, but mostly of their concern for the poor that were traveling below in third class. The sisters described those third-class accommodations as not fit for animals. Despite their own seasickness, they spent the journey ministering to the poor souls suffering below. After 12 rough days at sea, they arrived in New York City. Their real work was just about to begin. She was finally living the vision that she had when she set her paper boat missionaries into the stream in the Italian countryside at age 13. Mother and the sisters arrived in New York for the first time just 3 years before Ellis Island opened to handle the rivers of immigrants that were flowing into the country, most of them from Catholic nations in Europe. Mother and the sisters went to the neighborhood of Little Italy, a district where the displaced Italians, often from very different regions in Italy, which until recently had not even been a unified country, tried to find their foothold together in this strange new land. And this is what Mother Cabrini came to. These are photographs of Little Italy in New York as it was when she arrived at the turn of the 20th century. Wrenching poverty, anti-Catholic prejudice, sweatshops, in some cases organized crime, disease, and far too many children in poverty. Or orphans living on the street. Mother and her 6 sisters arrived with no resources to speak of. They found rough shelter for themselves and they began begging door to door just to raise funds for the work. Their donations came mostly in small change. But they managed to open a tiny, ill-equipped at first hospital for the poor in the Italian slums, and later that year, an orphanage for abandoned children. Eventually, churches and wealthier Catholics saw the good that they were doing and assisted with fundraising. Mother was, all her life, a prodigious fundraiser and a prodigious organizer and builder. She and the first 6 sisters set up several new homes and schools for orphans and abandoned babies that were in those days called foundlings. But the little paper boats, her missionaries, must sail downstream and across the seas to the ends of the earth. And there were plenty of other cities full of Italian immigrants, full of the working poor, and full of orphans who needed the Sacred Heart of Jesus given to them through a home and faith and education. And so, the missionary sisters of the Sacred Heart went to the other cities in America where they could find the great harvest that Pope Leo XIII had sent her to gather. In every one, she founded orphanages and schools and hospitals. New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles, New Orleans. She traveled to England and to France and to Spain, to Central and South America, and back and forth to Italy to recruit new sisters for her order and meet with church authorities and financial supporters. She was constantly traveling between all these places, fundraising, buying property, managing, leading, ministering. The little girl who was afraid of water made 25 transatlantic trips. How did she do it? I mean, how did she raise the money, buy the land, build the orphanages and the schools and the hospitals, and manage them all without phones or email or computers? Every day there was some urgent issue: financial, personnel, management, construction, legal, moral. There were constant balls to juggle, decisions to make, fires to put out. How did a little nun from the Italian countryside function as a global CEO? Well, on the human side of the equation, she had vision, a sharp intellect, a relentless energy, and a tireless work ethic. She was able to raise the money because she constantly asked people for it, and she convinced people, working people, rich people, church leaders, that what she was doing mattered, and they believed in her. You know, interestingly, the one source she never got money from was the government. But more important than all of that, she trusted in Christ, through whom she could accomplish all things. One time someone asked her how she managed it all. Mother Cabrini laughed and replied, "Oh, I put it all in the Sacred Heart, and then I don't get the headache. I just say to the Sacred Heart, 'It is your work, and I am doing it, and I can't do it alone, so you must help me.' And then I go to sleep, and the help comes." Too many American businessmen underestimated her when she came knocking to buy property or to build. She was canny and tough as nails. Some made the mistake of thinking they could take advantage of the little Italian nun, but she was shrewd in everything from buying land or buildings to managing contractors and raising funds and managing finances to pay for it all. 2 stories stand out. When she was buying the property in Chicago that would become Columbus Hospital, she suspected that the property measurements and the real estate contract were inflated, so she'd be paying too much for the deal. So she and the sisters stayed up all night tying shoelaces into a long tape measure and then remeasuring the property. The next morning they confronted the builder with the accurate measurements, and Mother made him change the contract to a better price. That site became Columbus Hospital, which became one of the preeminent healthcare institutions in the city for the next century. Another time, A dishonest group of contractors that she'd hired to convert a hotel into a hospital tried to pull contractor games on the sisters, thinking that these nuns would be easy marks. Mother saw right through their games and fired all of them. She then tucked up her habit and she stomped around the scaffolds for weeks, directing the laborers herself. But Mother's missionaries, her little paper boats, needed to go further yet with the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And so she went to Central and South America to personally oversee the establishment of missions there. In 1895, she and a group of her sisters departed from New Orleans on a ship for Central America. They arrived on the east coast of Panama as the canal was being dug. They traveled through the construction zone, through the jungle, and established a mission in Panama. Then they made a right turn and went up north to Nicaragua, where they established a mission in Grenada. From Nicaragua, Mother and the sisters sailed south along the coast of South America to Chile. They established missions in Santiago. They had invitations from bishops in Argentina and Brazil to establish missions in those countries. But how to get there? Sailing south around the tip of South America was a long and dangerous journey. So, Mother Cabrini, this petite, middle-aged Italian woman in a black habit, who was rejected by the nuns as a teenager because she was too frail, rode a mule over the Andes Mountains, down into the high plains of Argentina, to Buenos Aires. She and the sisters established missions there. From Argentina, she and the sisters journeyed north to Brazil. They arrived in Rio de Janeiro and established missions and schools. And eventually, Mother made her way back to the United States. And back to Denver, where in 1904 she established the Queen of Heaven Orphanage to serve orphaned children of Italian immigrants who worked in the mines up in the local mountains. And in 1910, she purchased the land on Lookout Mountain to become a summer camp for the girls. And in 1909, Francesca Xavier Cabrini officially became a citizen of the United States, an immigrant who would become the patron saint of immigrants, who embraced her new country and made a real difference in it and a lasting impression on it. The middle windows in the small room next to the chapel in Golden give us an insight into what motivated Mother Cabrini. 100 years after her death, I think we're tempted to view her work through our own postmodern notions of social justice. I think we tend to filter her ministry through our social justice politics, to see her as an urban reformer or a poverty advocate or a diversity and inclusion champion. I think we're tempted to believe that her primary motivation was alleviating material needs or balancing the social justice scales for immigrants and the poor. Now, don't get me wrong. Certainly, I think she would appreciate those goals, and her entire life was giving to, caring for the needs of the poor. But that's not what drove her, at least in the way that we conceive of it. And I think our misunderstanding of Mother's ministry has led to some pretty disastrous consequences. One of the worst failures of late 20th century social engineering was large-scale public housing projects. And perhaps the most infamous example of that social experiment was actually named after Mother. In an attempt to appropriate the Cabrini brand without Cabrini spirituality, secular government built the Cabrini Green housing projects in Chicago in the 1950s. Neither Mother Cabrini, nor the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, nor the Roman Catholic Church had any part in their vision, design, or management. Cabrini Green was such a notorious failure of social engineering that the name became a cliché term for failed public housing projects everywhere. Some of us who visited Chicago before they were torn down around the year 2000 remember these concrete towers. They were a warren of broken families, drug abuse, out-of-wedlock children, and crime, both organized and very disorganized. The Cabrini Green housing projects ought to be a cautionary tale about providing for only the material needs of children and families while ignoring their spiritual needs. The genius of Mother Cabrini wasn't in setting up soup kitchens or orphanages and schools. It was the missionary spirit of bringing the gospel and the Sacred Heart of Jesus and then providing for material needs while nurturing souls. Today, we've replaced her orphanages with government-run housing or foster care. We've eliminated what she called foundlings, abandoned babies, by simply aborting them before they're born. Instead of encouraging churches and people with means to fund the support of poor families, we've attempted to manage poverty with social engineering. And I have an honest question. Have any of our social metrics improved? Really? What has abandoning the methods of Mother Cabrini really gained us? It is not important to accomplish great and visible works, she wrote. The most important thing is to do well what Jesus wants of us, in the manner he wants it done, and in the circumstances that he desires. The central windows in the room off the chapel in Golden remind us of what was central to Mother Cabrini, the gift of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, which bound believers in Christ together and empowered their discipleship. The Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mother, a model for humanity redeemed in Christ. The crowning of Mary as Queen of Heaven, who intercedes for us in all trials until her Son makes all things new. It's exactly that spirituality, that devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary that gives context to the social justice ministry of Mother Cabrini. And I think it explains its success in comparison to secularist anti-poverty programs that are run by governments actually hostile to faith, which have had little success in either relieving poverty, attaining social justice, or nurturing stronger families and a more just culture and society. We need more Mother Cabrinis. But it's not clear that she would even be permitted to do today the ministry that she did then, given our politics or government policies.
When the sisters moved onto the property after Mother bought it, the only water was in a small pond near the chapel. The sisters had to haul all of the water needed for drinking and cooking at the summer camp from the stream at the bottom of the canyon. In September 1912, the sisters complained to Mother that they were dying of thirst and there was no water to be had. She answered, "Lift that rock over there and start to dig. You will find fresh water enough to drink and clean and enough to wash." And they found a spring of fresh water. It's housed here in an 8,000-gallon tank, and it has never stopped running since that day. Many pilgrims believe the water from this spring has brought healing and peace to their lives. Now, if you know your Catholic pilgrimage history, then the story of Mother directing the sisters to find a spring ought to remind you of how the Blessed Mother directed Saint Bernadette to find a spring of water in the Grotto of Lourdes, France. Well, in 1929, a replica of the Grotto of Lourdes, France was built here over the Mother Cabrini spring in Golden. It's a wonderful pilgrimage site to visit, and in candlelight in this grotto, ask for Mother Cabrini's intercession before the Sacred Heart of Jesus and His Holy Mother. In this stone dormitory, the girls from the city came up and spent their summers being outdoors, breathing fresh air, doing healthy, productive work, working and worshiping, and learning to live in Catholic community. In 1912, Mother made her last visit to this camp. She took several sisters and a few of the children from the orphanage by horse and buggy along a cow path to the foot of the highest hill here. Leaving the buggy at the base here, they climbed to the top, where they gathered white stones and arranged them on the mountain in the shape of a heart surmounted by a cross. With the smaller stones, she formed a crown of thorns on the highest promontory up here, overlooking the city of Denver. Francis Cabrini dedicated the hill to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, naming it the Mount of the Sacred Heart. Those stones are still at the top there. In 1954, this stairway of prayer was built, following the path that Mother Cabrini followed that day with the sisters and the children. Along the way are stations of the cross and mosaics imported from Italy. And at the top, a 22-foot statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, overlooking the city of Denver. Let's go up and see. And so, after a prayerful walk of 373 steps with the Stations of the Cross, we come to the top of the hill and the beautiful statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. In 1967, the Queen of Heaven Orphanage, right down there in Denver, was closed, replaced by foster care systems. And so, there was no more need for this summer camp up in the foothills. It became a Catholic retreat center for the Diocese of Denver, and of course, it continues to be a popular shrine and pilgrimage destination. We can't all take a pilgrimage to the Catholic sites in Europe or the Holy Land, but this wonderful shrine along I-70 outside Denver is well worth a visit to venerate the United States' first saint.
As Mother grew older and her body wore out from the constant work and travel, remember she crossed the ocean 25 times in her life, she grew more serene, living closer to the Sacred Heart of Jesus than she ever had before. And one day in 1917, while she was visiting the mission in Chicago, She failed to get up for Mass. The sisters checked on her. She was lucid, knowing that this would most likely be the day the bridegroom summoned her home. She passed with joy at 67 years of age from chronic endocarditis. The world mourned. Her life had been such that she was an obvious candidate for beatification. In 1928, the Vatican verified 2 miracles attributed to her intercession. And in 1938, Pope Pius XI decreed her blessed. The first of the miracles is depicted in this window. A newborn baby at Columbus Hospital in New York had been given the wrong medication and was blinded. Through the intercession of Mother Cabrini, his sight was fully restored. He attended her beatification ceremony and grew up to become a priest. The following year, 2 more miracles were attributed to her intercession, paving the way toward her canonization. And on July 7, 1946, Pope Pius XII proclaimed her a saint in St. Peter's Basilica, making her the first United States citizen to become a saint. Newspapers around America carried the news on the front page. People lined up to celebrate and honor her, not only in America, but around the world. In Chicago, 120,000 people packed Soldier Field to honor Saint Mother Cabrini. In 1950, the Roman Catholic Church named St. Francis Xavier Cabrini the universal patroness of immigrants around the world. Her body was exhumed, and her relics were distributed to various shrines around the world for veneration. There are 3 major shrines in the United States dedicated to Mother Cabrini: in New York, Chicago, and the shrine outside Denver in Golden, Colorado, which we visited in this episode. Perhaps the most touching of her memorials in the United States is this statue in New York City, in Battery Park across the river from Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty. She and the children that she cared for are riding in one of her little paper boats. The missionaries that she dreamed of sending to the ends of the earth as a sickly 13-year-old girl in rural Italy. In all, Mother Cabrini founded 67 orphanages, schools, and hospitals in almost a dozen countries. Although she never made it to China as she dreamed of as a child, her missionaries did. The Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus opened institutions in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, in Russia, and in Europe. The final window in the chapel depicts St. Francis Xavier Cabrini in her glory, with her motto from St. Paul, "I can do all things in Christ who strengthens me." As I studied Mother Cabrini to prepare for this episode, 2 thoughts came to me. The first is what St. Paul said about himself as he sat chained in Rome, awaiting his execution. "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. From now on there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." What Jesus said to the servants in his parable of the talents, he said to St. Paul and to Mother Cabrini. "Well done, my good and faithful servants." The second thought that occurred to me as I prepared this episode was, will we hear Jesus say that to us? What is stopping us from doing what Mother Cabrini did? Did she have advantages that we don't? Was it easier for her than it would be for us? If she did have advantages over us, I don't know what they were. She was a poor, sickly girl from the Italian countryside who came to America without $1 in her pocket. She had chronic bronchitis, a heart condition, malaria from travels in Central America. But she accomplished more dressed in a black habit with a rosary than CEOs do in their skyscrapers. She was a superhero with no superpowers, other than a deep love for others that came from her devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, a keen intellect, a entrepreneurial gumption, the stamina to get up every day and do whatever needed to be done to move the mission forward. Those aren't superpowers. Those are just acts of love and will. Nothing that's not available to us should we choose them. Throughout One Rolling Adventure so far, we've seen that in times of need, there will be heroes. Some will stand up, some will rise up and become saints. So the question I'd end with is this: what's stopping us? In these troubled times, who will stand up and be a saint? Will it be you?